Her son said, "Just for the weekend, Mom. It's temporary." By Sunday, she was sleeping beside a detergent shelf with no door. Janice didn't argue. She documented. By spring, the deed was reassigned, the locks rekeyed, and their storage bins were on the curb. They gave her the laundry room. She gave them permanent weekends somewhere else. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The sky was already the color of wet slate when Janice reached the corner of her block. Her knees ached from the long walk back from Marlene's, but she didn't mind the pain. It helped her stay present. She moved slowly past the row of modest homes, their porches cluttered with fall decorations bought on clearance. Her house sat at the end, squat and steady, with its brick exterior catching the last week light of the day. It was her house, paid in full, protected through every winter storm and medical bill, held together with sweat, patience, and a nurse's grit. She stepped onto the porch, taking a moment to shake a dry leaf from her shoe before unlocking the door. Inside, the lighting was brighter than usual, artificial and clinical. The warm yellow bulbs she always preferred had been replaced with harsh white LEDs, and the living room was in disarray. A tripod stood next to the couch. Soft box lights were pointed at the wall like they were interrogating it. Before she could call out, Eric emerged from the hallway with a smile that was too rehearsed to be sincere. His tone was breezy, almost boyish, as if this were a harmless surprise rather than a disruption. "Hey, Mom. Quick update," he began, holding a folded flannel blanket in his hands like a peace offering. "Sasha needed a bit more space for her shoots, so we set up her stuff in your room. It's just for the weekend, I swear. Laundry room's all set up nice and cozy for you." Janice looked at the blanket, then at her son. The absurdity of the offer wasn't lost on her. She hadn't asked to be displaced. She hadn't agreed. But Eric spoke as if the decision had been mutual, like she should be proud to make room for someone else in her own home. Without a word, she took the blanket from his outstretched hands. It smelled faintly of fabric softener and neglect. Eric clapped her shoulder lightly and turned back down the hall before she could respond. Not that she would have. Janice walked slowly toward the basement stairs, gripping the banister tightly as she descended each step. The air grew colder the farther she went, dry and stale like a forgotten utility closet. At the bottom, the overhead light flickered to life with a dull hum, revealing a space barely cleared for living. A twin-size mattress sat flush against the far wall, framed awkwardly by laundry baskets teetering with unfolded clothes. The floor was a patchwork of cracked linoleum and old rug scraps. One corner of the ceiling bore a damp stain in the shape of Iowa. At least that's what her husband would have said. She stood still for a moment, absorbing the quiet insult of it all. This wasn't a room meant for comfort or dignity. It was a space for storage out of sight, out of mind. Yet somehow, that's where her son thought she belonged. Just for the weekend. Setting the blanket down, she pulled her tote bag from her shoulder and began unpacking the items she'd brought from upstairs. Her reading glasses, the paperback she was halfway through for the third time, and a small lavender-scented lotion she used at night. She placed them carefully on the folding table someone had dragged in from the garage, treating it as if it were a nightstand instead of a makeshift surface wedged between a dryer and a rusty water heater. She sat on the mattress, careful to avoid knocking over the leaning tower of laundry beside it, and slowly lowered herself until she was lying flat. The springs creaked beneath her weight, stiff and unforgiving. Her joints flared with dull protest as she adjusted the blanket over her legs. Somewhere above her, she could hear Sasha laughing, loud, self-congratulatory, the sound of someone performing domesticity for an audience. A second voice followed. Eric's, then a third, maybe Becca's, though it was hard to tell through the thin floorboards. None of them called down to check on her. No one asked if she had what she needed. It was as though she'd vanished. The basement light cast a long static shadow against the wall. Janice turned onto her side and stared at the chipped paint, tracing its edges with her eyes, until the shapes turned into something else. The faint scent of detergent hung in the air, mixed with concrete and old memories. Her phone buzzed on the floor beside her. She reached for it with slow fingers and turned the screen over. Marlene, did you get your bed back? Janice stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she typed her response with deliberate calm. Janice, I got clarity. She set the phone back down, screen dimming to black. Above her, the laughter swelled again, more distant this time, fading as the house swallowed it. But Janice's eyes stayed open, sharp in the dark. The stillness wrapped around her like a second blanket. And for the first time in years, she felt wide awake. Morning came with no apology. Thin light crept through the basement window, just a sliver of sky between the hedges and the cracked foundation wall. Janice sat up slowly, her back stiff, the blanket tangled around her ankles. The air was colder today, and she had to wrap her shawl tighter around her shoulders before climbing the stairs. The house upstairs smelled of reheated waffles and artificial maple syrup. She moved quietly past the kitchen, unnoticed, and made her way to the spare desk in the corner of the living room, where her old filing cabinet still sat beneath a plastic ivy plant she hated. She pulled open the top drawer. Inside, everything was where she left it. Birth certificates, marriage license, medical records, and the deed. She slid the folder out carefully and flipped it open, scanning with the quiet intensity of someone who's been overlooked too many times. There it was in clean fading type, Webb, Janice Elaine. Sole owner, acquired 1986. Her thumb rested on the embossed seal. No mention of Eric, no mention of anyone else. She sat back in the chair and stared at the line of her name. That document had weathered more than 3 decades of storms. Rising mortgage rates, layoffs, hospital bills, and the loss of a husband. It had survived her own grief, quietly holding the title while she did the hard, unglamorous work of keeping a family standing. And now it was buried under laundry baskets and ring lights. Janice stood, walked to the dining table, and opened her laptop. It was slow to boot, almost as old as her microwave, but it served her just fine. She logged into the shared utility account. The charges blinked at her in a tidy column. Gas, electric, water, garbage. She clicked the payment history tab and began scrolling. The last contribution from Eric was dated 6 months ago. $48.22. Since then, nothing. Not a cent. Yet the thermostat was constantly set to 74, and the washing machine ran twice a day. She closed the browser without emotion and opened a new Word document. Title, What I'm Actually Owed. She stared at the cursor for a moment before she began typing in steady, meticulous lines. 6 months of utilities, 3 months of grocery inflation, 17 years of single parenting. 2 holidays skipped for their convenience. 1 bedroom taken. Janice printed the page, punched 3 neat holes in the left margin, and slipped it into a new binder labeled Records. Before she could close the computer, a notification pinged in the upper corner of the screen. Facebook. She clicked it out of habit, already regretting it. Sasha had posted again. The caption read, 3 generations under one roof, exhausting. But I guess love means compromise Nahash, family life # studio struggles. Janice blinked at the screen, then narrowed her eyes. The photo was of Sasha, backlit by the ring light in her bedroom, holding a mug that Janice recognized from her kitchen cabinet. The mug still had a chip in the rim. She remembered it because she never threw it out. It had a crack in the handle shaped like a bird's wing. She hit print. The page slid out of the printer with a quiet, mechanical breath. She added it to the binder behind the list. As she did, a thought settled in. They had made her invisible. Yet they broadcasted their lives to strangers with filters and forced hashtags, pretending that discomfort was mutual. As if her displacement was acute inconvenience, Janice returned to the basement with the binder tucked under her arm. She placed it on the small folding table, like a permanent resident might place a clock on the wall, marking time, claiming space. She didn't bother unpacking more of her things. She simply sat, flipped through the newly started folder, and nodded to herself once, like a ledger had been opened. Later that night, after the house had quieted and the floor above her creaked with the weight of Eric's late-night pacing, there was a knock at the basement door. Not loud, just 3 gentle taps. It opened slowly. Becca's head peeked in, her face half lit by the hall light behind her. "Hey," she whispered, not stepping inside. "I'm sorry about the basement." Janice didn't speak right away. She looked at her granddaughter, taller now, thinner, but with those same eyes she remembered from the high chair days. Observant, quietly furious. Janice nodded once. "Me too," she said softly. "But I'm glad you noticed." Becca gave a hesitant smile and closed the door again. Janice turned back to her folder, hand resting on the cover. The cursor blinked in the email window like a silent metronome, steady and expectant. Janice reread the message she'd sent the night before, checking every sentence for tone. It hadn't been long or dramatic, just factual. Clear. She'd written it in the same tone she used to chart patient vitals, precise, without adornment. "Thomas, I'd like to revisit my living trust and make adjustments to the primary beneficiary. Quietly. Please advise. Janice Webb." His reply came at 7:06 a.m., just after the sun broke the horizon. She opened it as the light pooled across the basement floor, warming the cracked linoleum in soft golden ribbons. Subject, Trust Amendment from Thomas Kearns. "Yes, quiet planning is my specialty. Attached is a draft to begin your review. We can finalize it without Eric's knowledge." She exhaled. Not in relief, something smaller. A release of pressure, like untightening a jar lid that's been stuck for too long. Janice downloaded the file, saved it to a folder she'd just created that morning. Estate update. Personal only. Upstairs, she could hear the muffled rhythm of someone walking heels, probably Sasha's. Janice closed her laptop and moved with quiet purpose. The binder labeled records still sat on the folding table next to her chair, and she added the printed draft from Thomas behind the Facebook post Sasha had made. There was an order to this now. A chronology, a logic. Later that afternoon, while Janice was folding a second load of towels at the kitchen table, Sasha breezed in with a big rehearsed smile and a foam cup from some expensive coffee. "I've been thinking," she said brightly, as if the two of them had just shared a warm moment. "That mattress down there is pretty old, right? Eric and I want to get you something nicer. Something firmer. Less creaky." She spoke like a nurse might to a confused patient. Benevolent. Patronizing. Hollow. Janice looked up slowly, towel still in her hand. Her face didn't move, but her eyes held steady. "That's thoughtful," she said after a beat. "But unnecessary." She folded the towel and placed it on the stack without breaking gaze. Sasha's smile faltered for just a moment, as if she'd expected gratitude or maybe guilt. But Janice simply turned back to her work, her movements fluid and unbothered. The gesture had been meant to soothe, or distract. But Janice was beyond placating. By early evening, Marlene was knocking on the side door, wrapped in her fall fleece jacket, holding a battered manila envelope under one arm. "Don't say I never do anything for you," she said without greeting, stepping inside. "Got these out of the fireproof box in my shed. Your originals, just like you asked. Purchase contract. Title, that nasty little inspection report from '86. Janice gave a small smile as she took the envelope and opened it with careful hand. She laid each document out flat on the dining table, while Marlene pulled off her jacket and started heating water for tea, like it was still her house. "We're scanning everything?" Marlene asked. Janice nodded. High resolution, and backed up twice. They worked silently, only the low whir of the scanner breaking the quiet. Page after page slipped through the rollers, a small sound of permanence each time. When they finished, Janice named the file, property_proof_jweb_master. PDF, and emailed a copy to her attorney, with a brief note, attached as discussed. After Marlene left, Janice sat at her laptop again, this time opening her bank's login page. She reached for her notepad and carefully entered the new credentials she'd created last week. Ones Eric didn't know, would never know. It took 10 minutes to unlink his old phone number from the emergency contact section. Another 5 to reset the security question. Favorite childhood pet? She typed, none of your business. By the time she shut the laptop, the house had gone quiet again. The kind of silence that comes when people retreat into screens and beds and things they don't want to talk about. The kind of silence Janice had grown used to, but would never accept as peace. She moved back toward the basement stairs, folder in hand, when she heard soft footsteps behind her. Becca, barefoot, holding a half-empty water bottle, and wearing a hoodie that hung off her frame like it belonged to someone else. Janice turned, surprised. Becca stared at the binder. You okay? Janice's answer came without pause, but not without weight. She looked her granddaughter straight in the eye. About to be. The smell of brown sugar and butter drifted down the hallway before the first knock on the front door. Janice stood in the kitchen, her hands deep in a mixing bowl, folding diced pears into a crumbly oat mixture that Sasha insisted would look great on camera. Her back ached from the hours she'd already spent prepping, slicing, rinsing, drying, and her wrists had started to throb from the motion of the whisk. No one had offered to help. No one had even asked if she needed a break. From the dining room, Sasha's voice floated above the clinking of plates and cutlery. Bright, breathless, artificial. We're so lucky, really. I mean, it's not easy having 3 generations in one house, but we make it work. It's about love and patience. A polite murmur of agreement rippled through the guests, women in pressed jeans and soft cardigans, nodding along like they knew the script. Janice heard glasses clinking, chairs scraping. Sasha laughed again, and it sounded like applause for herself. Janice didn't interrupt. She kept working, sliding the crumble into the oven and wiping down the already clean counter. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. She could see straight through the glass front cabinets to the mug collection Sasha had reorganized for aesthetic purposes. Her own husband's favorite, the navy one with the faded gold initials, had been pushed to the back. She left it there, for now. Eric appeared in the kitchen doorway, drink in hand, cheeks flushed with comfort. He grinned like someone proud of his own hospitality. Mom, don't forget the quiche, he said, gesturing toward the oven. She didn't respond, just nodded and set the timer. Back in the dining room, he was already mid-story. Yeah, when we moved into our house last year, we thought it'd be temporary, but you know how things go. Life's expensive. We've all had to make sacrifices. Janice dried her hands, folded the towel neatly, and laid it beside the sink. She stood at the edge of the kitchen and looked into the dining room without stepping through the archway. Her son sat where her late husband used to, at the head of the table, talking too loudly, gesturing like the walls belonged to him. Our house, he had said. She said nothing, just noted it, quietly, like a nurse marking vitals that were about to turn. As the guests chatted over coffee, and Sasha handed out tiny curated favor bags, Janice cleared plates without being asked, her hands moving from table to sink with automatic grace. She didn't make eye contact. No one thanked her. One woman offered a smile, unsure whether Janice was family or staff. Janice returned it briefly, then turned away. By evening, the guests were gone. The folding chairs were stacked, the table wiped down. Sasha was in her robe, reviewing Instagram stories. Eric had retreated to the couch to watch something on his tablet. Neither mentioned cleanup. Janice moved quietly through the space, gathering the last of the dishes. When she finally descended into the basement, it was almost 10 p.m. She switched on the light and stopped just inside the door. There, on top of her folded blanket, was a small note in handwriting she knew instantly. Becca's. She unfolded it carefully. You deserve the good room, B. Janice didn't cry. She didn't smile either, but her hand lingered on the paper, holding it like a small flame. She folded it back into a square and slid it between the pages of her binder. Something inside her settled. The next morning, she carried 2 empty boxes up from the storage closet beneath the stairs. She brought them to her room, her real room, and shut the door behind her. One box was for photos, faded Polaroids of Becca in Halloween costume, old anniversary cards with her husband's sharp handwriting, The picture of her in scrubs holding newborn Eric in the hospital, her smile tired but proud. The other was for jewelry, a small silver locket, her mother's rosary, a blue velvet pouch with 2 wedding rings, his and hers. She didn't rush, she wrapped each item in tissue, as if preparing them for a journey, not storage. That afternoon, Marlene stopped by unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key. Janice never asked for back. She took one look at the boxes, stacked beside the recliner, and raised an eyebrow. "They planning to move out soon?" she asked, peeling off her gloves. Janice shook her head, calm but certain. "No." Marlene lowered her voice. "Then maybe it's time you moved them." The printer gave a final low groan as the second page slipped into the tray. Janice reached for it carefully, her fingers steady. The font was plain, Times New Roman. No dramatics, no bold headings, just the facts. The words had been checked by Thomas, her attorney, and reviewed twice before sunrise. Notice to vacate, 30 days issued in accordance with Illinois law, signed and dated. She took the 2 pages and placed them gently into sheet protectors. Then she walked to the fridge. The house was still asleep. The only sound came from the faint hum of Sasha's ring light upstairs, still plugged in from the night before. Janice pinned the first copy of the notice beneath the magnet that once held Becca's elementary school report card. Then she moved to the front hallway, paused in the quiet, and taped the second notice to the inside of the front door. She didn't linger to admire it. By the time Eric stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and scrolling aimlessly through his phone, the sunlight had reached halfway across the hardwood. He stopped in front of the refrigerator, like he always did, eyes barely open. When he looked up and saw the paper, his brows pinched. He read it once, then again, then louder. "What the hell is this?" Janice, seated at the kitchen table with her tea, looked up without flinching. "It's legal," she said calmly. Her voice didn't rise. 30 days, Eric's mouth opened, but nothing coherent came out at first. Just a stammer, half-formed syllables fueled by disbelief. You can't just throw us out. This is insane." Janice folded her hands around the mug and gave the smallest shake of her head. "It's not insane, it's documented." That was when Sasha came rushing in from the hallway, phone already in, recording. "Oh my God," she said loudly, turning the camera to face herself in selfie mode. "This is what it's come to. My mill is kicking us out, after all we've done for her, for this house, for this family." She turned the camera to Janice, who didn't react, didn't blink, just stood, rinsed her mug in the sink, and walked calmly outside. She reached for her garden gloves resting on the porch rail, and made her way to the rose bushes that lined the side yard, tangled but still blooming, if pruned right. She knelt down, snipped a wilted head with sharp shears, and dropped it into the basket beside her. From inside, Sasha's voice was still rising in pitch, outraged and shaky. Janice didn't look up. By late afternoon, the footage had made its way to Sasha's social media, captioned, "Thrown out like trash. Pray for us." The comments were mixed. A few of Sasha's followers offered sympathy, but the neighbors, they weren't swayed. When Sasha went door to door later that evening, knocking with mascara-streaked cheeks and dramatic sighs, most of them simply frowned politely and said, "I'm sorry," with a tone that suggested they weren't. Mr. Robbins from next door offered her a Kleenex, and then closed the door halfway through her story. Janice, meanwhile, was back in the basement, organizing a new section of her binder, one labeled Executed Notices. She slipped both copies into the sleeve, clicked it closed, and exhaled like someone crossing a finish line no one else saw. That night, after Sasha had slammed enough cabinet doors to prove she was still angry, and Eric had sulked quietly in the den, Janice climbed the stairs and made herself chamomile tea. She added 1 teaspoon of honey. Her fingers didn't tremble. Becca found her out on the porch, wrapped in a knit shawl that had belonged to her great-grandmother. She sat beside her, silent at first, until finally she leaned in and gave Janice a long, tight hug. "Don't feel bad," Becca whispered into her shoulder. Janice rested her cheek against her granddaughter's hair and replied softly, "I don't." Later that week, a plain envelope arrived from the Peoria County Clerk's office. Janice sliced it open with the letter opener from her late husband's desk, pulled out the stamped court response, and read it twice. The law was clear. She had every right. The clipboard was old, one she'd kept from her nursing days, still scratched at the corners, still solid in her hands. Janice clicked the pen once and took her first step through the living room. She started on the right side, moving clockwise, just as she had done when inspecting patient rooms at the hospital before discharge. Section by section, nothing missed. The first item she logged was the sagging futon Sasha insisted on dragging in from her old apartment, the one with the cigarette burn hidden beneath a throw pillow. Janice noted its condition and location, then moved on. Next, the mismatched end table now cluttered with unopened mail, half-used cosmetics, and a half-empty energy drink. Sasha's handwriting scrawled across a sticky note, "Don't toss, photo prop." In the dining room, Janice recorded the ring light still wedged behind the curtain rod, 2 tripods, 1 folding reflector, a stack of generic faux farmhouse wall decor leaning against her antique buffet. She paused and placed her hand on the buffet's corner, where the varnish had worn thin from decades of polishing. They hadn't asked to use it. They hadn't asked to leave any of it. She continued on. Upstairs in the hallway closet, Eric had shoved 3 duffel bags against the back wall, still full from their supposed temporary move-in. She noted every item, every piece of luggage, every wire storage key Sasha had repurposed for product overflow. In the primary bedroom, her bedroom, she paused. The corner where her reading chair used to sit now held 2 canvas bins marked shoot-ready outfits. Her vanity was buried beneath an array of skincare products with labels and pastel fonts. Her lamp was gone, her curtains replaced. The room was no longer unfamiliar. It was unrecognizable. She didn't cry, she wrote. Downstairs again, she made one final note about the shoe rack by the door. Sasha's boots. Eric's running shoes that never saw pavement. Becca's canvas sneakers, clean, folded, placed neatly off to the side. Janice added a quiet asterisk beside those, not to be touched. She returned to the basement, sat at her folding table, and typed a brief email to Thomas. Subject, inventory logged, inventory complete, ready to enforce. Janice, she attached the scanned pages and hit send. By the time she stepped back into the kitchen, Eric was pacing, his arms folded across his chest, his jaw tense with performative calm. "I don't know what you expect us to do," he said, not looking at her. "We don't exactly have a backup plan, okay? We've got nowhere to go." Janice stirred honey into her tea. Her tone was quiet but level. "Neither did I. That weekend you put me in the basement." Eric's face fell just enough for it to register. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and left the room. Upstairs, Sasha was crying again, but only into her phone. The latest post went up within the hour. "Pray for us. Betrayed by blood. Please send good thoughts. This is not what family should feel like. Survivor mode #toxic homes." Janice didn't read the comments this time. She didn't need to. She clicked print, waited for the paper to slide out, and added it to the binder, right behind the Facebook post from last week. A growing paper trail, evidence not of her cruelty, but of their audacity. At 4:15 p.m., the doorbell rang. Marlene stood on the porch, holding a small box of brass key blanks and a new label maker like it was a care package. "Let's make sure you're the only one with a full set," she said without preamble, "and label the spares before they walk off." They worked in the entryway, changing out the deadbolts on both exterior doors, one by one. Marlene's hands were faster than Janice expected, steady, confident. By sunset, they had 5 freshly labeled keys: front, back, basement, garage, and spare. Marlene handed her the spare key and held up the others with a wry smile. "No more accidental entries," she said. Janice slipped the labeled set into her apron pocket, pressing her fingers around the brass like it might burn her if she forgot who held the rights. The calendar went up quietly, without ceremony, 1 thumbtack in each corner, pressed clean into the drywall just outside the laundry room door. Janice didn't center it. She didn't have to. It wasn't there for decoration. Across the top, in dark block letters, she'd written 26 days remaining. Each square below was blank for now, just numbered dates and waiting space. But the bold heading did its work. It hung like a stop sign in a driveway. That afternoon, as Sasha stepped down into the basement with a hamper in one hand and her phone in the other, she came to a full stop. She stared at the calendar like it had smacked her. Her jaw tensed, her voice slow but sharp. "Wow," she said. Seriously? A countdown? That's cruel. Janice didn't flinch. She was folding towels neatly, one edge lined to the next, as she always had. She didn't even glance up. No, she said. That's transparent. Sasha blinked, thrown by the evenness of the reply. She opened her mouth to fire something back, then thought better of it. With a tight breath, she turned and stomped back up the stairs, laundry basket bumping against her leg. Later that evening, when the house had quieted, Becca appeared in the hallway like a shadow. She didn't knock, just waited in the doorway until Janice looked up from the binder she was reviewing. Garage is empty, Becca said softly. I told Marlene we'd start bringing stuff tonight. Janice nodded once, and the two of them got to work. The boxes weren't heavy, but they carried weight. Old cookbooks Janice no longer used. Winter coats she didn't want Sasha claiming. Framed pictures she'd taken off the walls before anyone else could. They packed in silence, the kind of quiet that felt like trust. Becca didn't ask questions. Janice didn't offer commentary. They worked by porch light, making careful trips across the yard to Marlene's garage. No one noticed, or if they did, they didn't interrupt. By the third trip, Becca paused to rest her hands on her knees. What are you going to do with all this? She asked. Janice adjusted her gloves and looked at the stack of boxes now lined along the garage wall. Keep what's mine, she said. Let them figure out the rest. Inside, Eric had started to unravel. He'd made 3 phone calls that day. Janice could hear them through the floor vents, while she dusted bookshelves and wiped down baseboards. His voice sounded different now. Less arrogant, more clipped. He was asking for favors. Couch space, short stays. One call ended with, I get it. No worries, but the way he slammed his phone afterward told a different story. By Saturday, he was pacing again, hovering near Janice in the kitchen, not quite apologetic, not quite angry, like someone trapped in a slow-moving nightmare of their own making. Janice, meanwhile, was settling in. She placed a new doormat just inside her bedroom. It was simple, a soft gray rectangle with white script that read, Welcome home. She stepped on it every morning now, as she left the room to make coffee. It wasn't about ceremony. It was about reclamation. That same weekend, she walked to the department store 2 blocks over, the one she used to visit for school supplies when Becca was little, and picked out new linens. She took her time, ran her fingers along the edge of each fabric bolt like she was reading them in Braille. She chose lavender, not because it matched anything, because it was hers. That night, she unwrapped the sheets and spread them over the mattress. Fresh cotton, crisp corners. She fluffed a new pillow and slipped her hand under the case to smooth it, the way she used to teach nursing students in their first week. It was the first time in 10 years she had bought anything soft for herself. She sat down on the edge of the bed, looked out the window into the backyard, and saw Eric standing by the fence, phone pressed to his ear, eyes scanning the dark like the answers might live in the tree. Janice stood at the kitchen counter, buttering a slice of toast she had no intention of eating. The morning light slanted through the blinds, striping the countertop with quiet warmth, but it did little to soften the tension in the walls. The house was in a strange rhythm now, silent in the wrong places, restless in others. The calendar in the hallway now read 21 days remaining. She hadn't marked off each day like a prisoner. She let them sit, clean and unbothered, knowing they carried their own weight just by existing. A passive clock, counting down to inevitability. Eric had taken to rising late, pacing near the back door, with his phone glued to his palm. The calls were shorter now. Less pleading, more resignation. Sasha, meanwhile, alternated between aggressive cheerfulness and open sulking, depending on whether her phone was in her hand. That afternoon, Janice walked into the living room and found a post-it note stuck to the edge of the couch where she always folded her laundry. It was written in loopy pink marker, "Thanks for leaving the dryer full." Again, another was on the fridge. "Please remember to label your leftovers. Some of us actually cook." She peeled both off, without a word, and carried them to the fireplace. She didn't crumple them. She placed them on the grate with the same precision she used to fold surgical linen. Then she lit a match and watched them blacken, curl, and lift away in peace. Not anger, not performance, just removal. Later, at her small folding table downstairs, she pulled up the email thread with Thomas. His reply was brief but affirming. If enforcement becomes necessary, you're covered. I've filed the backup notice just in case. You'll only need to call if it escalates. Janice stared at the screen for a few seconds, then minimized the window and opened a second folder on her laptop labeled Alternate Plan. She didn't know if it would come to that, but she was ready. Marlene dropped by that evening with a loaf of banana bread and a large printout of a move-out checklist just to have. They sat on the porch while the house buzzed behind them. Sasha's voice drifted faintly from inside, something about personal boundaries and trauma-centered communication. Marlene chuckled under her breath. If she were any more full of herself, she'd need a zip code. Janice didn't laugh, but her lips twitched. She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. They really thought I'd just adjust. You did, Marlene said. Now you're adjusting the locks. They sat in a quiet stretch of dusk, the kind that made everything in the neighborhood feel paused. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Later that night, Becca came down the stairs, carrying a small laundry basket. Not her own, one of Janice's, older plastic yellow, cracked on the side. She didn't say anything at first, just walked in and began refolding the sweaters Janice had stacked earlier. Her fingers moved slower, not out of reluctance, but something gentler. Finally, she glanced over. You doing okay? Janice nodded, then paused, considering her own answer. About to be, she said. The same words she'd used once before, but this time, they felt heavier, more complete. Becca smiled faintly, then reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a stick of lip balm. She placed it on the table next to Janice's binder. Found this in your room. Didn't want Sasha grabbing it. Janice picked it up and turned it over in her palm. Lavender mint, the kind she used to keep in her purse when she worked night shifts. Thank you, she said softly, for remembering. Becca gave a half shrug and stood. I think remembering's the easy part. It's the watching that's hard. She turned, climbed the stairs, and disappeared behind the heavy thump of the door. Janice sat alone for a long time, staring at the closed laptop, the still laundry basket, the faded floral pattern of her binder. Then she pulled a clean sheet of paper from her folder and began to write, not a letter, not a complaint, just a single sentence at the top of the page. If they won't leave quietly, I won't ask twice. Day 30 arrived without warning bells, without yelling, without fanfare. Just light, golden and low, creeping across the porch floorboards as Janice sat with both hands wrapped around her coffee mug. She didn't speak. Not when Sasha slammed a cabinet in the kitchen. Not when Eric stomped past the front door in mismatched socks, still on the phone with no one calling him back. She didn't need to. The house had already heard what it needed to. At exactly 8:57 a.m., a moving truck rumbled to a stop at the curb. Big, blue, plain. The kind that didn't need to explain itself. Two men in matching windbreakers stepped out, efficient and unbothered, like they'd done this before. Janice sipped once more, then set the mug down on the porch railing. She stood slowly, adjusted the sleeves of her cardigan, and walked into the house. Eric was the first to see them through the living room window. What the hell is that? He said, voice already rising. They're not coming in here. They are not coming in here. He turned just in time to see Janice hand one of the movers a laminated document. Court seal visible. Signature crisp. He didn't even have time to snatch it before the man nodded, turned and headed up the walkway with purpose. Sasha came flying down the stairs, phone out, camera on. No, you don't get to do this, she shrieked. This is not how you treat family. This is harassment. This is elder abuse. Janice didn't look at the camera. She turned slightly, calmly, and gave the second mover the backup copy of the court order. Anything breakable is labeled, she said. Basement boxes are marked. Furniture upstairs is theirs, not mine. Sasha's jaw dropped. You've been planning this, behind our backs? Janice glanced at her, but didn't answer. Instead, she moved toward the hall closet, opened it, and removed a coat she hadn't worn since her husband's funeral. Gray wool, classic cut. She put it on slowly, buttoning each one without hurry. Eric tried a new tactic. Come on, Mom, he said, voice cracking now, the facade peeling. This is crazy. You don't really want to do this. We're family. You're just upset. I'm not upset, Janice said softly. I'm finished. From the front door, Becca stepped inside. She held a small canvas tote and a clipboard. I'll ride with them, she said, nodding toward the movers. Keep an eye on things. Make sure nothing gets accidentally misplaced. She didn't wait for permission. She turned and followed the crew upstairs. Eric's voice cracked again. Becca, are you really okay with this? With what she's doing? Becca paused halfway up the stairs. You put her in the basement, she said evenly. I'm just making sure she never goes back down there. Sasha burst into tears, but they were the kind that had angles loud, performative, saltless. Janice stepped onto the porch again, as the movers began hauling boxes down the stairs. Tripods, ring lights, bins of shoes. The framed family is everything. Sign that used to hang in Janice's hallway. She didn't watch them go. She turned her gaze outward, toward the yard, toward the hydrangeas she'd been meaning to prune. A light wind stirred the petals. By noon, the truck was closed, the last clipboard signed, the front door shut, and just like that, the house was quiet again. She walked back upstairs for the first time in a month without glancing over her shoulder. Into her room, not the makeshift corner in the laundry room, not the damp edge of a shared hallway, but her room. The sun had crept across the bed, hitting the lavender linens just right. She opened the window. The breeze that entered was cool, but not cold. She stood in it for a long moment, breathing, letting it move through the room like a cleansing. Then, with measured hands, she opened the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, removed the folder marked trust documents, and pulled out the previous version of her will. She placed it on her desk. Then she opened her laptop and began typing a new one. Not loud, not hasty, just final. Eric's name vanished from every clause. Becca's replaced it. The law office smelled faintly of lemon polish and dry paper, a scent Janice hadn't realized she missed. She sat across from Thomas Kearns, who wore the same wool tie he'd worn at her husband's memorial 15 years ago. Familiar, reliable. His hands moved with quiet purpose as he laid out the final documents between them. This, he said, tapping the top page, is the property transfer form. It'll take effect upon your passing. Immediate title goes to Becca. He glanced up, waiting for a reaction. Janice didn't blink. And the revised trust, he continued, sliding over a second folder, formally removes Eric as a named beneficiary. No contest clause included. Ironclad. Janice lifted the pen. Her signature was clean and slow, each loop deliberate. She didn't feel guilt, only a cooling inside her chest. Not cold, just still. Thomas nodded once, then gathered the documents into a folder labeled Web Janice, Final Trust Version, and tucked it into the secure cabinet behind him. Anything else? He asked gently. Janice stood. That's enough. By the time she stepped back out into the Illinois air, the sky had cleared. The humidity that had clung to the neighborhood all week had broken, blue overhead, sharp around the edges. She walked the few blocks back home without hurry. On the porch, a slim white envelope waited for her, taped to the mailbox in sloppy handwriting. No stamp, no name, just the unmistakable sprawl of Sasha's Sharpie rage. Inside, Janice sliced it open with the key to the front door. A printed screenshot tumbled out, a copy of one of Sasha's more theatrical posts from the week before. Captioned, "You think you know someone until they steal your safety. #family warzone #manipulative elders." Below it, scrawled in pen, "You'll regret this." Janice folded the paper once, slipped it into the folder labeled Social Posts. Archived, then picked up her phone and forwarded the image to Thomas. Her message was short. Defamation escalation. Please proceed. Within the hour, Sasha would receive a cease and desist letter via email and certified mail. Janice didn't wait for the confirmation. She had groceries to put away. That afternoon, 2 young technicians installed a sleek new security system, camera doorbell, motion sensors, reinforced window locks. Marlene stayed while they worked, sitting on the porch swing, sipping sweet tea like she had nothing better to do. You know, she said, watching the ladder go up. I heard Sasha's latest meltdown ended with her tossing a garden gnome at Eric's truck. He ducked. The gnome didn't make it. Janice arched a brow. She always did lack precision. Marlene smirked, then grew quiet. She reached into the canvas tote at her feet and pulled out a small plastic tray of hydrangea starters. Pale blue, barely blooming. Help me plant these, she asked. They knelt beside the mailbox, the same one Sasha had once criticized for being too plain, and began digging into the soft, cool soil. Janice pressed the roots gently into place, while Marlene patted the dirt flat around them. Why hydrangeas? Janice asked. Marlene wiped her hands on her jeans. They grow stronger if you trim them back hard. Janice didn't answer. She just sat back on her heels and looked at the row of tiny plants, lined like sentries in front of the house she'd once nearly handed away. That evening, a few neighbors stopped by. Mrs. Delaney brought over a container of baked ziti, just in case, and Mr. Robbins waved from across the street with a call of "Good for you, Janice. Been a long time coming." Janice accepted the food, the nods, the soft gestures of solidarity. No speeches, no explanations. Just a woman standing in the doorway of her own home, steady again. She placed the ziti on the counter, poured herself a glass of wine, and turned on the porch light, not because she needed it, but because she could. The call came just after 9, on a gray Tuesday that smelled like rain before it arrived. Janice let the phone buzz 3 times before answering. She didn't check the caller ID. She already knew. "Can I come by?" Eric's voice was low, cautious, like he was stepping barefoot across glass. "Just me, not Sasha." Janice paused. "You have 15 minutes. She didn't ask why he was coming. She already knew that too. She spent those minutes preparing, not herself, but the documents. Each one already in order, stacked and clipped, crisp corners aligned like surgical tools before a procedure. She laid them on the kitchen table one by one, the deed, the amended trust, the eviction order, and the notarized exclusion letter. The ink had dried days ago, but the paper still felt warm in her hand. When the doorbell rang, she didn't flinch. She opened the door to find Eric standing on the porch, thinner than she remembered, but not from hard living, just hollowed out. His coat hung loose on him. His eyes darted, as if expecting someone to slam the door in his face. Janice didn't invite him in. She simply stepped aside and waited for him to walk through. He entered like a man unsure if he belonged in his own skin. His hands were stuffed in his pockets. His voice was uneven. "I didn't come to fight." Janice nodded once. "Good." She moved to the table and gestured to the seat across from hers. He sat slowly, eyes scanning the stack of papers like they might bite. She tapped the first one. "This is the deed. My name's the only one on it, as it has been since 1986. The second. This is the trust. You're no longer listed. Becca is. The third. This is the eviction order. You've already received a copy. And finally, the last. And this," she said, sliding it to him with quiet finality, "is a notarized exclusion from my estate. I had it signed 2 days after you gave me the basement." Eric didn't touch any of them. He looked at her instead, mouth tight, jaw twitching. "I thought we could. I don't know." "Reset. Sasha's not part of this. Just me, your son." Janice held his gaze. "You gave me a blanket and a laundry room. You made it very clear what I was worth." He winced. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, but it did." His hands finally moved, restless, then still. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, white-knuckled. His eyes filled slowly. The tears didn't fall, not at first. They pooled, resisted, then spilled anyway. "I messed up," he whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." Everything was falling apart, and Janice raised a hand. Not harsh, just enough to pause the unraveling. "You're not here to reframe it," she said. "You're here because I allowed it." Eric lowered his head. Shoulders shaking now, one sob escaped, quiet, childish. He wasn't 41 in that moment. He was a boy who didn't expect consequences to stick. Janice sat still, watching. Becca had come down the stairs sometime during the exchange. She stood in the hallway, silent, just her eyes visible, framed by the edge of the wall. She didn't move, didn't interrupt. She just bore witness. Eric finally reached for the exclusion letter. His fingers hovered over it, then curled into a fist instead. Janice folded her hands on the table. "You'll always be my son," she said, "but you're no longer my heir." There was no hate in her voice, no venom, just the clarity of someone who had run out of space to accommodate the delusions of others. Eric rose, nodding slowly, his face blotchy and raw. He left the stack untouched. At the door, he hesitated. "You think Becca's going to want anything to do with me after this?" Janice looked past him, to where her granddaughter still stood quietly at the base of the stairs. "That's between you and her." The envelope wasn't sealed, just folded shut, the flap tucked neatly inside itself. Cream-colored, thick, stationery from a box Janice had once received as a retirement gift and never used. She left it on Becca's pillow that morning, just before the girl returned from her shift at the bakery. No ceremony, no speech, just placement. Deliberate. Janice didn't hover. She'd already returned to her own room and begun the quiet process of sorting files in reverse, removing duplicates, cleaning up outdated passwords, streamlining everything into what she now called her final folder. The house was quiet, the way a house is after heavy weather. Upstairs, Becca found the envelope. She opened it with both hands, her thumbs gentle against the fold. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, handwritten. The lines were steady, the ink blue and unhurried. "Becca, thank you for never laughing at the laundry room. You're the only one who understood it wasn't about space. It was about permission." Inside the file folder labeled "Final Folder You'll Find," deed transfer documentation, living trust, finalized, will, notarized, banking passwords, security code to the front door, write it down and memorize it. Emergency contact for Thomas Kearns. "I'm not planning to leave soon, but I'm done being surprised." Below this, you'll find something I never wrote down until now. Lessons, unpolished. Don't wait for people to value you correctly. Peace is louder than performance. Never let someone else narrate your sacrifice. Silence can be mercy or strategy. Make your home harder to enter and easier to leave. Love you. Grandma J. Becca read it once, then again. She pressed the page to her chest and wept, not loudly, not broken, but like something old and private had been cracked open. Her tears fell in steady silence. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long while, just holding the page, as if afraid that moving would lose its. Downstairs, Janice was taping a small note to her bedroom door. The handwriting matched the letter, clean, angular, firm. "This room stays mine." She smoothed it flat with the heel of her palm, then stepped back and nodded once, satisfied. That evening, Marlene found her on the porch with a glass of red wine and a plate of cheese she hadn't shared. She didn't stand when her friend approached. She just shifted to the left side of the swing and motioned with a flick of her chin. Marlene sat, exhaling as she adjusted her back against the cushion. "House is quiet." "Quieter," Janice corrected. They sat like that for a few minutes, the sun low and stretching across the porch rail like a cat warming itself. Marlene sipped from the glass. Janice poured her without asking. "So," Marlene said finally, "now that the house is yours again, what's next?" Janice didn't answer right away. She reached down to the side table and handed Marlene a folded printout. It was a real estate listing template, with photos, bullet points, and a section marked rental potential, lower level walkout. "You're renting the basement?" Marlene said, brows lifting. "Not to family," Janice said. "To someone with a lease, security deposit, no hashtags." Marlene grinned. "You're serious. I want the house to earn something back for me, not just keep absorbing my peace." Marlene raised her glass. "To dusting it, not burning it down." Janice smiled. "I didn't burn the house down. I dusted it." They clinked glasses. A light wind carried the scent of hydrangea and fresh soil. The first coat went on in long, steady strokes. Pale slate gray, just warm enough to catch the light without drawing attention. Janice dipped the roller into the tray, let the excess drip for exactly 3 seconds, and started at the top left corner of the living room wall. the same way she'd taught Becca to wash windows, edge to center, smooth and even. The old beige paint had dulled long ago, yellowed in patches by years of half-hearted living. It hadn't been touched since before her husband passed. But now, with each pass of the roller, it receded like an old story that no longer deserved a place on the wall. Becca knelt nearby, unfolding drop cloths and stacking the light switch covers in a neat row beside a small labeled box. She didn't talk much, she just worked, taping edges, replacing trim, sweeping dust from corners. They didn't have to say it aloud. The house was waking up. Later that afternoon, Janice walked into the old guest room and found Becca measuring a bookshelf against the window frame. "I thought this room could be something better," Becca said, standing back with a small level in one hand. "A reading nook, or just yours?" Janice raised an eyebrow. "Mine? Not for guests," Becca clarified. "Not for sleeping bags and folding chairs. For quiet." Janice looked around. The walls were bare, the carpet was old, but there was space, potential. They spent the next hour clearing it. Old bins, unused decor, a broken humidifier. They set up a second-hand armchair from Marlene's garage, washed the windows, and draped a soft wool blanket over the backrest. Becca added a lamp she'd picked up from the thrift store for $5, its brass base scratched but sturdy. The bulb clicked on with a gentle hum. The room didn't become something new. It became something true. That evening, as Janice stepped out to retrieve the mail, a silver SUV idled across the street, engine on, windows tinted, parked just slightly too long. She didn't need to squint to know who it was. Sasha sat in the driver's seat, her posture stiff, her phone pressed against her ear in a way that suggested she wasn't really talking to anyone, just performing the appearance of being busy, in control. Janice met her gaze through the windshield. She didn't wave. Sasha looked away first, flicked the blinker like it mattered, and drove off. The moment passed without commentary. Inside, the kitchen table had become Janice's new desk. Her laptop rested beside a manila folder labeled Financials, Final Year, and beside that, the last piece of documentation she needed to complete. The Form 8822 for address confirmation, and the county record of property tax filing, all lines filled, all digits accounted for. She clicked Submit and watched the confirmation screen load in quiet ceremony. Ownership, Janice Webb Soul. Primary, unshared. There was no applause, no crescendo, just peace. Later that night, Becca found her sitting in the freshly painted living room, scrolling through her phone. The window was cracked open. The wind carried the soft scent of latex paint and earth. "You okay?" Becca asked. Janice didn't answer right away. She held up her phone. "I posted something," she said, tapping the screen. Becca took it and read. "You don't lose family when you protect yourself. JW." The caption was simple. No hashtags, no location tag, just the truth. Finally spoken into the light. Becca sat beside her and rested her head on Janice's shoulder. They stayed that way until the air chilled enough to pull the window shut. The lavender cotton came out of its packaging like it had waited years for air. Soft, not overly floral, with just a whisper of dye still lingering on the fabric. Fresh, clean, unclaimed. Janice spread the new bedspread across the mattress, smoothing it corner to corner. She tucked the edges down the way she used to in hospital rooms, a habit she'd never entirely let go of. The room was quiet, not with absence, but with presence. No clutter, no piles, no other voices reverberating off the walls. Just her breath, just the hush of something unburdened. She lit a candle next, setting it carefully on the small ceramic tray she'd once used for earrings. The scent was sandalwood and something faintly citrus. It didn't try to impress, it just warmed. Then she took Becca's framed sketch, the one from 3 Christmases ago, drawn in charcoal and care, and placed it gently on the nightstand. It showed a tree, bare-branched and strong, with roots curled down into the corner of the page like they were holding it upright. Janice had cried when she first opened it. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because Becca had drawn it without being asked. She left her bedroom door open that night. Not as an invitation, as a statement. There was no one left to walk past and sigh. No one to shuffle loudly down the stairs. No one to make her space feel provisional. The air moved easily now. No cold drafts, no unsettled corners. She slept deeply. No interruptions, no echoes of boxes shifting above her. No laughter from behind doors not hers. Just sleep and the soft press of lavender cotton against her shoulder. The next afternoon, Evan came over for dinner. Becca had invited him the week before, and though Janice had said she didn't need the company, she hadn't objected either. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a small bundle of thyme from his garden, wrapped in a paper towel like it was fine china. Becca baked cookies, molasses and sea salt, and pretended not to glance toward the oven every 3 minutes. The three of them ate roasted chicken and green beans, laughed once about a podcast Evan couldn't explain, and didn't bring up Eric at all. Janice washed the dishes barefoot. The kitchen tile was cool under her feet, grounding in the background. A low crackle gave way to trumpet. Her old vinyl copy of Kind of Blue playing from the turntable. Marlene helped her repair last spring. The record spun smooth. No skips, just melody and warmth, moving through the house like it remembered where to go. As the evening settled, Becca slipped upstairs with Evan, promising to pack him a few cookies for the road. Janice didn't rush to clean. She wiped down the table slowly, then lit a second candle on the windowsill, watching the flame stretch as the breeze nudged it gently. An hour later, the porch creaked. Marlene appeared with a large rectangular bundle in her arms, wrapped in painter's tarp and tied with twine. "You didn't," Janice said, already knowing she had. "I did," Marlene replied, lowering it carefully beside the front steps. "It's from the estate sale down on Mill. Man said it was handmade. No one had a place for it." Janice pulled the tarp back. The porch swing was weathered cedar. The chains were newer, but the wood held a warmth, slightly chipped, slightly worn, shaped like something that remembered how to hold rest. Together they attached it to the hooks they'd left untouched for years. The swing moved in slow, steady arcs, creaking in rhythm with the wind. They didn't speak for a long while. They didn't need to. The stars blinked open, one by one, slow and patient. A car passed. A screen door snapped shut across the street. Somewhere a wind chime hummed. Janice sipped from her glass and leaned back into the curve of the wood. "I was never asking for more than I gave," she said softly. Marlene nodded, voice low. "You just finally stopped giving it to the wrong people." Janice didn't answer. She didn't need to. Janice walked the hallway with a pad of pale yellow sticky notes in one hand and a ballpoint pen in the other. Her steps were slow but certain. No rush, no second guessing. This was the curation of a space now wholly hers, and every note she placed felt like a soft command. On the china hutch in the dining room, this stays. On the chipped faux farmhouse sign in the garage, that goes. On the antique mirror in the front hall, stays, always. The tags were small, but they carried weight. They weren't about possessions. They were about decisions. Finally, exclusively, hers. She entered the basement last. The air had changed since winter. No longer stale, no longer tense, just still, neutral. The laundry room was clean, walls scrubbed, floor swept, the old utility sink glinting faintly beneath the overhead light. The extra blankets had been folded and stored. The mattress against the far wall was gone. Janice stood in the doorway for a long moment. Becca appeared beside her, holding a fresh notepad and a Sharpie. "Want to turn it into something?" she asked softly. "A guest room? Studio? Craft space?" Janice didn't answer right away. Her eyes traced the corners of the room, the pipes, the exposed ceiling beams. It wasn't warm, it wasn't cozy, but it was empty, and that meant something. "No," she said finally. "I want to leave it just like that." Becca didn't press. She looked once more into the room, then stepped back. They climbed the stairs in silence. Janice paused near the top step, one hand grazing the railing. For a split second, she could hear it again, the hushed clatter of Sasha's camera gear, Eric's voice muffled through the floorboards, her own breath catching in the cold, but only for a moment. The house was different now. That echo didn't belong anymore. Later that day, Janice walked from room to room one last time, not in farewell but in full presence. Her eyes scanned the new paint in the living room, the softened light in her reading nook, the porch swing now worn in just the right places. She touched the armrest of the chair in the corner, adjusted a pillow, checked the front window latch, not for security, just for rhythm. Then she moved to the door. The key was small, brass, freshly cut. The last duplicate had been returned days ago. This one? This was hers. The only one that mattered. Janice turned it once in the lock, then again, slower. The sound clicked into place like punctuation at the end of a sentence. She didn't step outside. Not yet. She lingered in the doorway, fingers curled around the key, her back to the room behind her. The house felt still but alive, like it was listening. A final sticky note sat quietly on the laundry room door. This room stays mine. And on the inside of the front door, taped eye level in the same calm handwriting. Welcome home forever. She inhaled, then turned the knob, stepped through, and pulled the door shut behind her, with the same steady, unshakable hand that once folded linens through grief and silence. No applause, no audience, no echo, just the quiet truth of what she'd built and claimed back. She stood on the porch for a moment longer, holding that one key. Not because she needed to, because she'd earned the right to. Her voice was low, nearly a whisper, but certain. They gave me the laundry room. I gave them the door.